Governor Rauner gets a win as the U.S. Supreme Court decides that government workers can't be forced to pay union fees. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We've got some state and federal stuff happening this week as the U.S. Supreme Court and the Illinois governor were all in the same place. Charlie Wheeler is here to talk about it. He is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Before that, a longtime Chicago Sun-Times correspondent at the State House. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you, Bernie. I always enjoy being here with you guys.
And Hannah Meisel is back. She is State House reporter for the Daily Line. Welcome back, Hannah.
Glad to be here.
Okay, Charlie, the Janus decision came down. It came down as expected. It was on the last day of the U.S. Supreme Court session this last week. It was a 5-4 decision with Neil Gorsuch, the new Supreme Court justice who was appointed by President Trump, siding with the majority to say that Mark Janus, a state employee living in Springfield, and others who are state employees in bargaining units that don't want to pay fair share dues, which the governor has called forced union payments, don't have to because it's a freedom of speech issue. I know you have said on this program before that you think you probably disagree with the decision, but tell us about what happened and where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, basically the issue was Mark Janus, who works for the Department of, I believe, Healthcare and Family Services, objected to having to have a portion of his paycheck taken out and giving over to AFSCME, the union in which he's a member of the bargaining unit. And his argument was that I don't agree with some of the stuff AFSCME does, and therefore I shouldn't be forced to go contrary to what I believe in. It's a free speech issue on my part. I shouldn't be forced to subsidize this stuff that I don't believe in. Now the argument on the other side is, well, yeah, Mark, that's maybe true, but by law we can't take your dollars and use them for campaign contributions. We can only use them to negotiate a contract by which you'll benefit, no doubt, because you'll share in the wage increases and the health care and working condition improvements, all that. And if you have a problem with a supervisor and you have a grievance, we'll be there to back you. So we think you ought to really pay for that. You shouldn't really be a freeloader and get all these freebies without kicking in your fair share. And then the other flip side, or going back, is Governor Rauner and Mark Janus and his allies say, well, that anything that a public employee union, be it AFSCME, be it service employees, be it a teachers union, inherently it's political because it's involved members of the government, and there's a conflict of interest when AFSCME sits down to negotiate, let's say a city council somewhere, and has given campaign contributions to that city council. There's a conflict there, and we shouldn't have that. And so the Supreme Court came down on the side that yes, it's a violation of free speech because you really can't draw the line between what is just plain advocacy and what is political activity, so you shouldn't have to contribute if you don't want to. Now the governor is framing this as being a great victory for free speech, but I think the bottom line is, as it was indicated by a column written by Greg Hines, who's with Crane Chicago Business up in the city, basically it was politics. AFSCME, particularly and other unions, particularly in the times of Rauner, have contributed heavily to Democrats, and this Rauner and his supporters and those who agree with him see as a way to kind of kneecap the unions. It's like a renewal of that century-long struggle between labor on the one hand, capital on the other. Capital wants to maximize profits, labor wants a little share for the people they represent.
This is, it applies only to government unions, so the capital side is the government, which is just kind of interesting, although Republicans may be more in line, I guess in history with big business than Democrats are. So if Democrats are helped in the legislature, then
there's not any doubt about it. And it's a way to go after the union's ability to fund Democratic candidates.
Hannah?
One of the points that conservative Justice Samuel Alito, who wrote the majority opinion, he mentioned it, I feel like, in a couple different places in the opinion. He alluded to the contract negotiations between the governor and AFSCME, and he said, it sounds like the governor, they proposed reasonable options, and AFSCME rejected them, instead suggesting that the government basically spend more money. And then by that, he said, he also mentioned Illinois' pension debt. So now that's forever encapsulated in a U.S. Supreme Court decision. That's great. And so he said, it seems like the unions, they're pretty responsible for Illinois' mismanaged finances. And so he said that is inherently political for unions to direct how much government money is being spent.
This sounds very interesting, because that sounds a lot like what Governor Rauner
When
has
I
been
was-
saying.
yeah,
since
exactly.
he ran
Yeah, it's right
in
up Rauner's
2014.
playbook. It's all the Democrats and the unions that fund them. That's why we're in such a bad shape. And if we didn't have unions, if we could just eliminate them and eliminate Democrats, this would be a Plutarchic Eden.
Well, I think the first time I ever saw Governor Rauner in person, I had talked to him on the phone for one story, but he spoke at Brandt, which is an agricultural products and services company in Springfield, a lunchtime thing, just a meet and greet. And he said there that if government unions, if private sector union bosses did what government union bosses did, they would go to jail, which, Charlie, as you said, he was talking about helping put someone in power, meaning help with an election, and then sit across the table and bargain for your wages and pension from that same person because of the conflict. That's just his philosophy.
The captains of industry who contribute to people like Rauner, when they sit down and cut a deal like Walker did for Foxconn, $4 billion in subsidies.
That would be Scott Walker, the governor.
Yeah, Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin.
I was thinking of Dan Walker, and he didn't.
No. There's no conflict there. That's all
Understood.
on the up and up.
So anyway, it does, as Hannah points out, match
not to
the
interrupt,
rhetoric.
but I should preface, or not preface now, but I should always mention the disclaimer that, yes, I'm a union guy, lifelong member, lifetime member of the Chicago Newspaper Guild, member of the union at UIS, and I'm a strong believer in organized labor and collective bargaining, because I think it basically made the middle class what it once was.
Another point that I want to point out, because it's so often overlooked, I definitely saw some African American lawmakers on Twitter yesterday lamenting the Janus decision, because there is historical precedent for private unions, trades unions, not being very friendly to African Americans and other minorities. And so public unions were a lot more welcoming to African Americans and other minorities and help them build middle class lives.
And I think that's also interesting to note, just because I think it was in the first State of the State address that the governor gave, he mentioned that as he put out his turnaround agenda, a lot of which would weaken public sector unions, and talked about the need to weaken them on the local level too, so local governments could get rid of the mandates, which often means get rid of some of the collective bargaining that they have to do right now. But he talked about it, and we want unions, and it was either first year or second year, but he has given a major speech that, and we want minorities to be treated better by unions. Yeah. So he'll always say, I like unions, but then he'll use the rhetoric about union bosses, and et cetera. Anyway, it's part of the deal. I want, right after this decision came out, in addition to the governor appearing in a press conference just outside the Supreme Court in Washington, and it came about 4 days later than people thought. It came out on Thursday.
He was up there kind of
or Wednesday,
waiting,
and
right?
He was up there since apparently Sunday night. He actually appeared with John Tillman, who is the head of the Illinois Policy Institute, but also a co-founder of the Liberty Justice Center, which is one of the legal entities that represented Mr. Janus for free, along with a national right to work group. And they appeared together, Rauner and Tillman. Now Tillman, after Rauner signed an a pro-abortion bill that allows Medicaid-funded elective abortions last year, Tillman called him Benedict Rauner. And after a story came out from some other news agency, I think ProPublica and maybe the Sun-Times, saying that Tillman has many interlocking organizations that he's part of, some of which are paying him. Rauner said, I'm never going to give another nickel to that Illinois Policy Institute. Well, they were together on this, and Tillman in particular said, look at the leadership Governor Rauner has shown, because this is now a nationwide change in the status of public sector unions. So strange bedfellows, or just a reconnection between a couple of old friends who had fallen out?
Well, I don't know if I would apply the label friends, but definitely this is something that the governor has envisioned for himself since he started running, 5 years ago, basically. And, John Tillman, the IPI, this is something they've long advocated for. And, the governor has not done so well with his 44-point turnaround agenda. This is the one thing that he can claim victory for, the other being, at least in my opinion, the vilification of Mike Madigan, that someone, 4 years ago, people outside of his district maybe knew his name, but now everyone in the state knows Mike Madigan.
A lot of campaign
Yeah,
dollars.
Anyway, so, the IPI and Rauner joining to celebrate this, that doesn't surprise me.
Right.
No, and the funny thing is that the Republican Party had tried for years to vilify Mike Madigan, going back, Lord, 30, 40 years. Because I remember as a reporter one time, they made the claim about, who was it, some downstate Democrat. He voted with Mike Madigan 90% of the time. And so some of us took the trouble to look at all the roll calls, and darned if the Republican leader didn't vote with Mike Madigan 90% of the time. Because as you guys know from covering the legislature, the vast majority of bills aren't controversial.
Right.
And they get like 108 or 107 to 3 or something like that. So that's been going on a long time. The difference is Rauner had the money to put behind it over all platforms. As I've said before, he bought the Republican Party fair and square, and it's paying off for him. And I would say on the major issues, going back to what I said before, capital versus labor, Tillman and all the affiliated organizations, sort of the spider web of networks all across the nation, and Rauner, they're all on the same page on that.
They are indeed. Right after their appearances in Washington, or maybe about the same time, once the decision came down, the Rauner administration, I think through Central Management Services, sent out an email to employees saying, here's how you can just go online and drop your union affiliation. Like Doug Finke of SJR staff, who is our State House guy, earlier today I was talking with him. He said there were no numbers yet if a lot of people are doing this right away. Do we have any expectation on the drop-off? I know when they did a similar thing on the state level in Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker up there with teachers that brought all those people to the State House until the legislature passed that bill to defang unions in a sense. I think they lost, a lot of union members statewide, but do we have any idea yet? Obviously the unions are saying we will prove our worth, we are going to stay strong and stay together and tell people why it's useful to pay the dues and stay a member and stay active.
I can't say that, I have no idea how many people will drop off, but just anecdotally, I spoke with a state worker yesterday, and I was like, how widespread is this feeling that Mark Janus has? He said, he's in all his years as a state worker, he only knew one person who was like that. And then yesterday I also spoke with 2 teachers who are pretty heavily involved in their unions at different districts. One mostly rural district, another suburban district. And they said, they're taking the time, they're taking the care to make sure that new teachers, especially anyone who's hired on, because summer is hiring time, that they really understand the value of the union, that older members who are closer to retirement understand, what the union can do for them at that point in their careers and their lives. But they both said that, right now, union feeling might be strong. They'll be galvanized because of the Janus decision. But down the road, if it's something that involves a lot more paperwork, it's kind of the same principle as if, I came into a company and I had to, opt into a 401k plan. I'm probably a little bit less likely to do that just because of the paperwork, just because it involves extra steps from me. Whereas, prior to this decision, it was a lot more streamlined.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on to just the political impact of this. Another big political thing that happened this week is State Senator Sam McCann from Macoupin County, who was elected to the legislature as a Republican, but had a falling out with Governor Rauner, partly because he's pro-labor on some issues that Rauner was not, and Rauner supported an opponent in a primary against him a couple years ago, and Sam McCann prevailed.
McCann voted against him on one override vote.
which is to allow arbitration to decide to settle the
contract
AFSCME
disputes,
contract,
yeah.
which is still not settled since it expired in mid-2015 and during Governor Rauner's first year. Anyway, he filed as a third-party candidate called the Conservative Party, apparently with the help of Operating Engineers Local 150, which has been helping Pritzker, but also has members on both sides, they say. He was able to gather 65,000 signatures as a third-party candidate. He needs 25,000. He is confident that he will be on the ballot, so there's that. Then so Sam McCann, conservative, social conservative, who likes labor and working people in general, he says, is now probably going to be on the ballot. Then you've got J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat, who can also spend lavishly on a campaign. He's already put more than $100 million. Sorry, that used to be a lot. $100 million of his own money into the campaign. So the Janus decision. I talked to one of your former colleagues at U of I, Charlie, Chris Mooney, who's now at University of Illinois Chicago. He said, well, the unions are going to be against Rauner anyway, totally. Yeah. Maybe this gives conservatives who don't like Rauner a reason to say, well, maybe he can accomplish something, so maybe some will come help to him. But you can play this both ways. What do we think about the political implications of the Janus decision as November election approaches and Governor Rauner is running against Pritzker and McCann, and also a libertarian named Cash Jackson, who is another story. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that Governor Rauner beat Pat Quinn with a certain number of votes composed of different types of individuals. Some of the individuals were people who disagreed with what Quinn did on pensions for state workers and teachers and others, and were really mad at him. Mm-hmm. And normally they might have voted for a Democrat, instead they voted for Bruce Rauner. Now, in the wake of Janus, are those folks going to want to stick with Rauner? Are they going to say, man, I made a horrible mistake 4 years ago and I ain't going to repeat it? On the other side, you have the people who voted for Pat Quinn. Are any of them going to say, oh, now that union workers have free speech rights, they don't have to pay any money to that nasty union, I'm going to vote for Rauner for doing that? And in my mind, I don't see how this particularly helps Rauner much at all.
Hannah, any thoughts on that one? There's political implications?
I mean, I do think that the decision will further galvanize you. Pritzker is going to, I would bet that he would come out with some sort of public education campaign on the effects of Janus. You know, of course, swung to his side.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I don't know. The other thing, though, is it's not just Janus. It's, you know, everything that happened in March. No one expected Jeannie Ives to do so well.
Right, who was the conservative state representative from Wheaton, who came within 3 points of beating Bruce Rauner in the primary in March, in the Republican primary, because she was a social conservative, and she says also fiscal conservative, but it was social issues that really drove things like the abortion flip that the governor, well, in a sense, flipped that the governor did, because he said he would veto that bill for Medicaid-funded abortions.
I don't see her people going to Pritzker, do you?
Oh, no. But, you know, possibly.
But could they go to
McCann?
McCann?
Rauner,
well,
or could they go to McCann?
I looked at Sam McCann's, or Macoupin County's vote totals from March, and Ives won pretty overwhelmingly in Macoupin County, but then J.B. Pritzker got almost twice the turnout. The Democrats got almost twice the turnout. I can't pretend that I know exactly
well,
what's going to happen.
But historically has been a Democratic county.
Yeah, and that's where Andy Menard is from, and was
coal
county board
mining
chairman.
and those kinds of
things. And they've been a strong labor area, so it will be interesting to see where this goes. But you have to say, I mean, the Pritzker campaign, and I know the Rauner campaign spends lavishly and has. The Pritzker campaign has kind of the anti-Trump and the anti-Rauner, but also has field offices all over the state, because $100 million goes to more than TV advertising. They have got coordinators all over the place, and people making phone calls and knocking on doors. As I know everybody tries that, but they've just got a lot of money to do that.
I thought was interesting was that Mike Bost, who is a congressman from deep southern Illinois, came out decrying the Janus decision. Right. He said that he had been a union member before he got in the legislature and now Congress. His grandpa was a union coal miner down there, and he thought it was a bad decision.
Right, which
I think
is some
he's-
indication that there's not a solid Republican wall
I think
saying
he's
this is a great thing.
the only Republican that I'm aware of.
That I'm aware of, too.
Yeah,
from Murfreesboro.
who sided with the unions on that.
Yeah, let's, I did mention, and just because last Monday was the deadline for third-party candidates to file, Libertarians filed a full slate. The guy who filed for governor, who has gotten a little publicity before, is named Cash Jackson. He lives in far northern Illinois.
But the artist formerly known as?
He changed his name a year ago from Benjamin Adam Winderweedle, but he did mention that, like one of his parents liked the name Johnny Cash, but his Cash is with a K. Anyway,
And there's a state law that says if you change your name within so much time of an election, you have to put on the ballot Charlie Wheeler, formerly known as...
Right, and so this will all be on there. And that's partly
Basil
because in
Humperdinck or
Chicago,
whatever.
probably a lot of people would change to Irish names so they could get elected judge.
sure.
on- I grew up in Cook County, and you'd have like 100 different judge choices to make, and most people don't know anything if you don't bring in like a newspaper editorial to tell you who's the worst to not vote for. So it's pretty interesting. Anyway, the Libertarians, again, they needed 25,000 signatures. They have made it to the ballot before. They turned in about 47,000, so they have a cushion. Problem, Cash Jackson, he is twice divorced, and not to get terribly personal, but he has been found in arrears on child support. I asked about that when he had a press conference. He said he wasn't exactly sure, but he was a few $1,000s behind right now for his 3 kids. So that is going to probably be an issue in his campaign if he catches fire, although I'm not sure we think that's going to happen with the Libertarians this year, although they put on a good press conference show, but I'm not sure how far that goes. Charlie, third parties have a hard time in Illinois traditionally.
they really do.
They not?
For one thing, the rules through the coordination, the collusion, if you will, of both major parties are definitely slanted against them. McCann had to file 25,000 valid signatures. Rauner only had to file 5,000. Pritzker only had to file 5,000.
Right.
That's if you're running in an established party's primary, you only have to file 5,000. If you want to run as a third-party candidate or as an independent, you have to file 5 times as many.
Okay.
That's unfair from the get-go.
Right, but they can still get it done. But as the Libertarians were complaining, it's a shame we have to spend so much time and effort just to get on the ballot instead of doing other
and
campaigning.
I would say I'm not sure. Well, McCann's got 65, and he needed 25. I think he's pretty safe. I wouldn't bet that 47 is enough.
We'll find out.
The
We'll
way the
probably
game
find
is
out,
rigged.
and I think this coming Monday is the deadline for people to file objections, and then hearings would come after that.
Yeah.
Charlie, as we started taping today, you mentioned that there's an Associated Press story about the state's going to have to quickly pay out $300 million to nursing homes because a judge ordered, if you can't determine who's eligible for Medicaid, you have to pay by this certain date.
Yeah.
So it's just another problem, fiscal problem for the state of Illinois.
Yeah,
right
John
now.
O'Connor had the story, and basically, last year there was a suit filed saying, hey, you have to determine whether these people are eligible or not. We're the nursing homes, and we're providing their care because it's a community service. We live here, we care for folks in our community, but we're having to front the state this money. And so the judge, federal judge, said, okay, by June 30th, you have to be caught up within a reasonable, I think it's like within 30 days. Billing can't be longer than 30 days or 45 days. Well, we're not going to make it, not even close to it. So we're on the hook for $300 million. Ultimately, and it's got to be paid out like right away. Ultimately, we'll maybe get half of it back from the federal government. But the difficulty is that as we've moved into this newfangled, and I can say that because I'm an old guy, electronic determination system, and all this computer wizardry, apparently it doesn't really work the way it was sold. We spent twice as much on it as we thought we'd have to, and it still can't do the job. And the humans aren't there anymore to do it either, and so we're really lagging behind. And the judge says, enough of that nonsense. They're going to be eligible until you can figure out whether or not they're not.
Okay,
and so we're facing that huge...
Okay, that's one issue. I think it was also a John O'Connor story, a former colleague of mine as well. Tim Mapes, former chief of staff to the speaker, who, after some allegations that he said some inappropriate things or didn't take certain allegations of harassment from staffers seriously enough or pass them on in the appropriate way, he resigned recently, and now it turns out that unused vacation and sick time, he's getting more than $130,000. This will raise many eyebrows. Some of the law on that has changed. He's been with the government for, I don't know, is it close to 40 years? But it's one of those things that doesn't make the system look good, right?
I suppose if you look at it in that sense, oh, he's leaving under a cloud, we should strip him naked and throw him out on the street. But if you look at, the guy's been here 40 years, and he works his tail off, and so he doesn't take all his days off. When I left the Sun-Times, I had accumulated like 6 months of comp time.
You were always at the State House, Charlie.
Yeah, and back in those days, the legislature met a lot more often.
And sometimes till 3 in the morning. I remember those days too.
And we had a union contract. I didn't get paid any overtime, but on the other hand, I got comp time, and I never had a chance to take it all. So when I left, they said, okay, well, here's what your comp time should be. Okay. And I got a big check.
So you're saying if you earned it under the system that was there?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. And we've only got a little bit of time left, but Hannah, we heard this week that the Democratic County Chairs Association, they took out the men from the name, is bringing Joe Biden, former vice president, to speak in August at the county chairman's breakfast, which always kicks off a big Democrat day at the state fair. This will be at the Crown Plaza in Springfield. Your thoughts on having Joe Biden back? He was here when Barack Obama introduced him as his running mate.
Oh, was he?
He was. Right at the old state capitol. It was Obama's second big event there.
Well, the Crown Plaza, anyone who's been there, if they've been to an event, they open every single partition, and it's just this massive room. Like, I think last year I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm at like 5 weddings at once. It's huge. I want to say it was like
well with that
1,800 people. But like, they never fill to the edge. I feel like
I think they will.
With a big star like that of the Democratic Party, it's possible that, and during an election year.
Yes, and I hate to put it this way, more work for us with the former vice president coming to town. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you to Charlie Wheeler and Hannah Meisel. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.